Hey guys! Today we're going to be making some miniature pancakes as well as a basic frying pan. If you enjoy these videos and want to see more, definitely give the video a thumbs up and feel free to leave any food requests in the comments. Let's get started! First off, to make the frying pan, you're going to roll out a sheet of clay and then take any tool of your choice and mark off the size you want it. Cut that out. I chose to cut it at a slight angle to help slant the sides, but you can also cut it straight and then correct it after. I then used my blade to make it a bit more smooth and even out the shape, and then baked. After baking, take any mold putty of your choice and make a mold. You can then roll out a thin sheet of clay. I dusted one side with some cornstarch so that it wouldn't stick to the tools. I then placed it on top of the mold and used my ball tools and dotting tools to press it into the mold. And you can use your blade or X-Acto knife to cut off any excess clay from around the edges. Once you're done, you can bake it, and then after baking, take it out of the mold. To give the frying pan that enamel look around the sides, I'm going to be using my F-color enamel powder. I'm not sure exactly what this color is called. It might be Dove Grey and it might not be. Basically, you want to take your clay piece and dip it into the powder to get a thin coating. After baking, preferably when it's still hot and a bit sticky, you want to dip it into the powder again. And then just repeat the process until you have the coating and look you want. It might be a bit messy, so I'm baking it upside down on an old mold. I then painted the inside using black acrylic paint, both to cover up any powder that may have gotten onto the inside, but also just to get a more intense and even black. Next, I took a thin piece of metal. The metal I'm using is from a reshapeable cake pan I have, but you can also use the metal from a can of food or something similar. I used a needle tool to sketch out this rocket ship type shape, which is going to be part of the handle, and then use some scissors to cut it out. I wouldn't recommend that you use your good scissors to cut into the metal because it is going to dull them a lot more quickly, so it might be a good idea to keep a separate pair for cutting stuff like this. You can then fold in the 3 tabs at the bottom. This is easier to do after you add and bake the clay for the rest of the handle. I chose to do it this way so that it's easier to show in the video. I then added some clay. Usually I add the clay and then use my tools to sculpt it to the shape I want before baking. For this one I chose to bake it right away, and I then used a file after baking to shape it. I used a universal glue to glue it onto the frying pan. I also used my electric file to make a hole in the handle. Originally I wasn't planning on making one, but I decided to make one anyway. This is also the reason why I'm doing it after gluing the handle onto the frying pan. The next thing you want to make is not an absolute necessity, but I do recommend making it, so I just took some mold putty and flattened it, then used a toothbrush and a pointy dotting tool to add some texture. We're going to use this for making the melted or sizzling butter, which is just going to add some extra realism. Once the mold putty has set, you want to take some glaze, add it to the mold, and then let it dry. And while it dries, you can begin making the pancakes. For the pancakes, you want to take a light yellow toned dough color, roll out a sheet of clay that's a tiny bit thicker than you want the pancakes, and you then want to use your X-Acto knife to cut out some circles that are also a tiny bit smaller. Use your finger to flatten them a bit, which is going to give them the right thickness and size, and it's also going to make them look less like they've been punched out of a sheet of clay. You can then begin adding some texture. I first went ahead and added some texture to the side or edges. For this, I first used a pointy dotting tool, I then used a toothbrush, and lastly a needle tool. If you have any questions about the tools and materials I use, I always link my video about it in the info box. In there you'll also find a link to my FAQ as well as a video about baking. For the texture on top, I once again used my pointy dotting tool, followed by a toothbrush. Try to keep the texture fairly shallow, because when looking at a pancake, the texture doesn't really go that deep at all. So if you make the texture look too defined, it's not going to look as realistic. Once you're done, you want to bake the pancakes. I also made one that is kind of bent, which is going to have a spatula underneath, and after baking I simply glued them onto the frying pan. Next we're going to be adding the shading. I first used 2 colors of soft pastel to give them a nice baked look on top. As always, I'm applying the soft pastels using a damp or wet brush, and once I was done with this step, I sealed it with a matte glaze. I found a picture online of some real pancakes which showed if they were lacking milk, eggs or something like that. Apparently the perfect pancake is supposed to have an even brown surface. I don't like that look, so that's not what I'm going for, but if you prefer that look, definitely go for that. I then went in with 2 colors of acrylic paint to add the rest of the shading. For the butter, I mixed a tiny bit of yellow into the dough color, then simply took a small piece and used my X-Acto knife to add a tiny bit of texture. I then baked these and glued them on top of the pancakes. To make a super simple spatula, I just took a piece of some scrap wood. You can also use a popsicle stick. I used a mechanical pencil to sketch out the basic shape, used a saw to cut it out, and then finally used a file to round off the handle and flatten the spatula itself. To make it look used, I took the same 2 colors of acrylic paint I used before and added a small amount to the tip. To make the syrup, I mixed up some resin, and to color it, I just added a tiny bit of watercolors. I can't tell you exactly what these 2 shades are called. They came in a set of 48 Schminke watercolors. And if you don't have watercolors, you can also use a tiny bit of acrylic paint or food colors. I then just let that thicken a bit before adding it to the pancakes. Take the mold we made in the beginning of the video and peel off the glaze. Then attach this in small pieces to the frying pan using either glaze or glue. I also used a tiny bit of white acrylic paint to enhance some of the bubble effect. Finish off with some glass glaze, and you're done. Really hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next tutorial.